Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to make a hot foiled card with this Magnolia Glimmer Blooms set. Now, this isn't a brand new one. It is a new to me one, but I couldn't wait to pull it out and use it. And I always love when foiling plates have dies to go with them to cut them out. So I've got my glimmer machine here warming up. I have some hammer mill cardstock. I'm using champagne hot foil here, and I'm also going to be doing this must-have sentiments foiling plate to create the sentiment for this. I love how it creates a bunch of sentiments at once. I'm using a quarter sheet of hammer mill here, so I'm not actually going to get all of the sentiments from that plate. It's going to have most of them on it, but rather than pulling out another piece of cardstock for this, and I didn't really need it for this particular card, I just figured I would use whatever foiled on that piece to begin with. So I have both plates on my machine. I let it warm up, put my foil and then my cardstock and plates on top, press the timer button, and once that timer button was done, I put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine for the pressure. You need the glimmer machine for the heat, and you need a die cutting machine for the pressure. I always like to do the solid hot foiling at the same time while I have my machine warmed up. So I put the plate on there, let that warm up, and did the exact same steps. Put the foil on there with the pretty side facing the plate, hammer mill cardstock on top, and then my plates, press the timer button, and then once that had gone off, I put it through my foiling machine. So I'm not going to be using that negative foiling for this particular card. I do cut the magnolia piece out, thinking I might use it for this card, but I ended up not using it. While I have my die cutting machine out, I pulled out the dies to go with those hot foiling plates, and I'm taping them in place before die cutting them. It's always a great idea to tape these in place to make sure that they don't shift on you while you're die cutting. And I also find that for this, I typically will die cut with the blade side up. For these though, I find it works much better to die cut them with the blade side up. Blade side down. I find if I tape them in place and then try to die cut them with the plates or die side up, like the blade side up, I find that that paper kind of rides on the die and it shifts it a little bit, and you don't get as precise of die cutting. So with those sentiments die cut and placed to the side, I can start working on coloring my image here. So I have a detailed ink blending brush, and I'm just using some Victorian velvet distress ink. I love how this is kind of like a dusty rose, but then it's got a touch of coral in it. It's a really, really pretty color, and I thought it would be gorgeous for these magnolias. You can do your flowers in whatever colors you wanted. I wanted, well, this color basically. I wanted just a nice soft color for spring, but I wanted to show off those poinsettia blooms. Now I'm going from the center of my flower out, and sometimes I'm using the side of the brush if I want kind of a straight edge and want to have where I want the dark color to go. I do that right after I've put it in my ink pad, and then I flick it out. I kind of blend my way out so that I get less and less ink. I want the darkest part to be on the center of the flower, and especially when there's a petal going under another one, I want that to be where my darker color goes. Now, I don't use this Victorian velvet distress pad very often, and anytime I do pull it out and bring it out, I wonder why, because it's a really, really pretty color, but it's just not one of my go-tos that I usually think about. But for this, it's absolutely gorgeous. And you can see how easy it is to ink blend on this hammer mill cardstock. You could use other ways to color your images if you want. You could color them with Copic markers. You could do some quick coloring with some dye-based markers if you want, just depending on the cardstock that you have chosen that you like to foil with. I typically will use either distress inks to ink blend, or I'll color with my Copics. Those tend to be my go-tos for coloring this, or coloring in foiled images. I just like how easy it is to do. And I love the fact that the foil resists the ink. So when you're doing the ink blending here, you'll see that the ink dulls the foil a little bit, but all you have to do is take a piece of paper towel or a soft cloth and just buff it a little bit. It removes that ink from the foil, and then you get the shine back. And you can see how quick and easy it is to color in this image. It really doesn't take a lot of time at all. I love images like this that come together so quick, and they just absolutely look gorgeous. once I have most of my image or all of my image colored, I like to go back and just make some areas a little bit darker. So I'll go back and do some areas where the petals are closest to the centers and just darken that color a little bit. Make sure that I have some nice ink blending here. The detailed ink blending brushes that I get come in 3 different sizes, and this is the medium size. You could also use the smaller one if you wanted to really get into some of those nooks and crannies, but I found this medium size worked perfectly. Now that that ink blending is done, I decided to ink blend one of the sentiments. At this point, I was thinking my card base was going to be white, or I was going to be putting the sentiment onto the white cardstock. I ended up not using this sentiment, but decided to keep it in this video just in case you decided you were creating a card and wanted to have a colored or a sentiment onto some colored cardstock. This is an easy way to make sure that your cardstock matches the colors you've done your ink blending in perfectly. And it's really, really easy to do some ink blending and coordinate that sentiment with your image. Now, once you've done that ink blending, you can use a paper towel and just remove any of the ink that's on top of that hot foiling. There's a tiny little bit of green from a stem, so I took a Tombow marker and colored that in. And then I wanted the centers of the flowers to be yellow, so I used a Tombow marker for that as well. You could easily use an ink blending brush and a ink pad for the centers of the flowers. That would work as well. The stem part, though, is really, really tiny, and I think it would have been more trouble than it was worth coloring that. So the Tombow marker worked perfectly for that. I'm using some Essential Arches dies here. I want to create an arched background, but I want to tie in the gold foiling. So I have some Inca Gold cardstock here. It's just a beautiful gold that's not too yellow. It matches the foiling perfectly. And I'm just doing a thin frame to go around that arched nesting die that I'll have on the background of my card. So my flowers in the end is going to go onto this dusty rose type of cardstock, and then I'm going to have that gold frame foiling around the outside edge to tie everything together and to frame it nicely. So I do like to tape all of those dies in place when I'm creating a frame like this. That way I can make sure that that frame is nice and even all the way around. There's nothing worse than taking the time to create a little bit of a frame and it ends up being too thick on one side. Much easier to have everything taped in place so you know that it's not going to move and shift on you while you're doing your die cutting. I also like to glue this together with some liquid glue. That way I can move things around as I'm doing it, making sure that the spacing around the outside of my piece is perfect. If you by chance get any of that liquid glue on there, it's really easy to wipe it off while it's wet. It just does change the finish to that mirrored cardstock, so you do want to do that while it's wet, but it's really quite easy to just wipe it off. I'm taking that frame, gluing it to the front of the card, and then just figuring out where I want the placing for my magnolias here. This is the point where I took that negative foiled piece, tucked it in behind because I thought I might like it there, but it ended up being too busy and it took some of that focus off of that flower. So I took it out, but I left that in here so you could see how it would look. And then you could see that I was debating between the two sentiments there, and I ended up just using a white sentiment so that that could really show off with the flowers on that dusty rose background. You can see that I have a couple leaves going off of the card here. I don't mind that. I like it. If that bothers you, you can use some scissors and snip them off. Just note that that one going off the bottom of that cardstock, it's going to affect the way this card stands. So you might want to cut that one off so that it stands nicely on a mantle. I took a little bit of glisten stickles just to put in the centers of those flowers, just to add another glint of sparkle here. And here is the finished card. I absolutely love those magnolias. They are so gorgeous, and that dusty rose color with a little tiny bit of coral is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. Have a fantastic day.